Search is changing fast enough that marketers are being forced to answer a pretty uncomfortable question. If the clicks disappear, how do we prove the work is still working? Today, we're talking with Derek Hobson, the person behind SEO Humorist. Derek has spent years working across organic search and paid media, but what makes this conversation especially relevant right now is that those old channel boundaries are starting to break down. This isn't a conversation about whether SEO is dead, it's that AI search is forcing marketers to rethink where influence actually comes from and how it gets measured. Derek talks about why direct traffic may be telling us more than we think, and why log files, fan-out queries, and grounding data could become much more important to understanding what happens between an answer and a website visit. He also makes a strong case that off-page SEO can't be treated like an optional add-on anymore, and that creates a pretty big organizational problem. Most companies are still set up around separate teams, separate budgets, and separate reporting. Derek's argument is that the marketers who win in this environment are going to be the ones who can connect those pieces and who are willing to investigate a good result just as aggressively as a bad one. There's a really interesting thread running through this conversation about curiosity. Derek started his career as a maritime historical reenactor, or as he puts it, basically a pirate. And somehow that leads us all the way to AI search, experimentation, and why younger SEOs need more opportunities to break things, test ideas, and figure out why something worked instead of just checking boxes. Our industry has always rewarded those who are willing to look underneath the surface. The tools are changing, but that instinct matters now more than ever. The Page 2 podcast is brought to you by Moving Traffic Media, the digital marketing agency Joe and I founded, specializing in SEO, answer engine optimization, and performance media. Learn more at movingtrafficmedia.com. All right, here we go. Welcome to another exciting episode of the Page 2 podcast. I'm your host, John Clark, and I'm joined as always by my partner at Moving Traffic Media, Joe DeVita.
Hello.
Today's guest is Derek Hobson, an SEO strategist, writer, former senior director of SEO and AI search at Brainlabs, and the person behind SEO Humorist. Derek, welcome to the Page 2 podcast.
Hi,
Derek.
Thank you for having me.
We're so happy to have you. You have such a strong resume. We've got so many hard questions we want to ask you, but I want to start a little bit maybe in the way back machine to learn a little bit more. I know you have formal training in English, but it seems you have a very strong passion for history too. So you spent some time as a maritime historian. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I used to work at the Ocean Institute in Dana Point. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, no, I like this because this is how I always communicate SEO to people who are like brand new. Because my full title, as you mentioned, it's like maritime historical reenactor. But I just like the easiest way is just I was a pirate. I would get dressed up in period appropriate clothing in the 1800s. We had any number of different grades coming aboard from from third all the way up to like seniors in high school. Most of the programs were dockside where the boat didn't actually leave. It would be like an overnight program where we do a number of things according to the California curriculum. But there are obviously with the older kids, we would do sometimes a week or 2 weeks out. And we would actually sail these, actual replicas of tall ships where a lot of times we would just be under sail like you would in, 1830s. And yeah, it was an incredibly impactful, influential part of my life.
I can imagine the questions coming from third graders up to 12th graders are wildly different.
We have some rapid fire questions for you at the end on important naval battles, so be ready for that. So you spent a big chunk of your career with Brainlabs, a really big agency where you had a really important job in paid search, and you've been on your own for maybe a year and a half now?
Yeah, actually, I think it's just about 8 months.
Okay. So I guess like before we jump into the nitty gritty, what's like a typical Thursday look like for you in 2026, different than last year working at a big agency?
Yeah. So last year, it genuinely I was the guy who 15 minutes prior to a call that I was scheduled to be on, that was scheduled at least a week in advance, I would be pinging someone on Slack being like, hey, I'm not going to make it. And it's not a result of poor planning on my part. Usually it was having worked a lot on the new business side of things. They're like, hey, remember that person that we pitched 3 weeks ago? They said now is the only time they have. Can you hop on a call in 10 minutes? And I know that it was a lot of chaos. And don't get me wrong, in many ways, loved it, but it made it harder, I think, to be thoughtful about where my time is going. And I know there's an old saying that your job gets your best, your family gets the rest. And I knew I wanted to change that. And so part of that is why we wound up moving to Amsterdam in the Netherlands, which has been great because most of my clients are on the East Coast. So now, like a typical Thursday, I wake up, I prepare my daughter's lunch, me and my wife and my daughter all bike over to her school. Then we might go for like a picnic somewhere or ride bikes around the park. But then we can, take care of some errands, chores, and pick up our daughter again from school because they're usually out relatively early. And like my day starts usually around like 3 p.m. in Amsterdam time. And by then it's like, I've done everything that I wanted to do. I am alert. I am here and I can just focus in on the client work. And it's that sort of flipping the family and work, I think has been just in terms of my happiness, it's been monumental.
I can imagine. Yeah, that's incredible. Yeah, especially though, it sounds like your daughter is young. I think those early years are just so important and fascinating to be a part of. It's amazing that you can structure your day around that. That's great. So I guess when people come to you now, what do you find that they're looking for? Are they coming to you for AI driven stuff? Is it still more, I'm going to call it traditional SEO? Like where do you get your clients from? Like what are they looking for?
Yeah, they're usually looking for a buddy. Yeah, no, I'm joking.
Someone to talk to.
Yeah, but like as much as I am joking, it's kind of that. Like I started noticing this a lot, especially in the final months I was at Brainlabs. But they don't want they don't want to have to like call an assembly. They don't want to have 13 people on a call. They're like, they want to have that. Hey, can I ping you on Slack or text you? I won't abuse the privilege, but I'm having trouble figuring out what's going on with AI. Can you give me some transparency? Like what is happening? And I think that's like now when people do fill out a form or coming to me, it's usually that like a lot of them have a level of understanding of SEO. They have a level of understanding of AI search, and they're just like, am I doing something wrong? Am I doing something right? Like, they're very much, the clients I tend to work with now are very much like they do a lot of the stuff themselves or at least like fluent in it. And yeah, it's just, they're really just honestly looking for like a consultant, someone to just tell them like, yeah, here's what I can see. And, they know I'm not going to manufacture a problem.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I definitely want to dig into the AI stuff, but I wanted to talk quickly about sort of like paid and SEO integration, just knowing that was a little bit of your background at Brainlabs. Maybe we can tie AI into that. As part of those insights, analysis, like strategies, were you seeing AI start to play a role there in terms of how that data was either collected or merged together, or maybe even just influencing how budgets were split?
Definitely, especially in the latter half of 2025. I felt like late 2024, early 2025, we saw a lot of people pulling back on budgets toward SEO. And then late 2025, early 2026 is when there seemed to be less timidness around AI, like less like this is a fad, and more like you guys are looking into this, what can we do differently? And I think that's something that on the SEO side, it became very much like, well, where's the overlap? What's the Venn diagram of AI tactics versus SEO, and kind of building those into new or sort of refined products. Like for example, I didn't touch a meta description for probably the last 3 years, just because I'm like, Google's going to rewrite it anyway. There's no value to this on the SEO side, but seeing that that's something that LLMs are now continuously crawling and scraping, and sometimes will actually serve directly in, I'm like, okay, well, this is something that I wouldn't do for SEO anymore, but I will do it for AI. And I think it's stuff like that we start to kind of parse, like what are things that we would do for AI that we wouldn't do for SEO. And on the paid search side, they actually, I know there was a lot of hubbub around AI Max and there's a lot of experimentation, but I've found that most of the people that I work with, as well as a lot of the people who work at other agencies I've talked to, they've kind of reeled it back and they're like, we'll do PMax and we'll do traditional search, but like until AI Max improves, we're not going to do anything with it. And that's been great because on both of those, I have a lot of experience kind of being like, here's how we can make the two play in the same space.
Yeah, I think at Moving Traffic Media for our clients, the AI Max performance was lackluster, maybe at best. So I think we're seeing similar trends there as well, just in terms of how we're maybe rethinking about testing into it. But I've always loved the opportunity to sort of take those two data sets and sort of combine them together to figure out some smart strategies, maybe even tests.
Are there like some specific reports or an analyses that you would do to facilitate a conversation between two teams? Maybe it's something you couldn't pull directly from a platform, but you had to do the analysis to say, here's an opportunity, here's an opportunity. What do you guys think?
Yeah, it basically would have G Sheet where it would take in some of the important paid metrics of like clicks, impressions, CTR, conversion rate. And then some of the other useful ones are like the quality score and like lost impression share. And on the organic side, obviously I would take like organic rank as it relates back to the keyword, as well as I would typically use a tool like Ahrefs to pull the top 10 SERP features. And I basically would line these all up in a horizontal grid. I would also take the ad groups and like next to all of these metrics, I would basically just do like some basic average ifs formulas where it would be like, what is the average clicks for this ad group? And so because I would do that across all of the keywords being targeted, it would then automatically conditionally format if a certain keyword was above or below the average. And so then I would do that too with like conversion rate and things like that. And what this was helpful in doing was so that even if something like, oh, this has a high conversion rate, oh, but their cost per click is astronomically higher than the ad group average, it would give us very clear insight into like, maybe there's something that we can do with this or finagle. And that's where on the organic side, it would be fun having the SERP because sometimes we would see something like that where it's like, well, this one is converting, but the cost is extremely high. And then we would show on the organic side, it's like, well, yeah, the top 5 results are all videos and you're trying to target this with a landing page. And so it was helpful in terms of like talking to clients and having those discussions of like, look, if you guys have a video, you should try that. But clearly what the SERP is telling us is that people are interested in watching something, not interested in like going to a landing page and reading through like a whole ebook to figure out what it is that they want to do. And so I found those are some of the ways that like, so I would typically gather that data and then like for high ticket items, start to like give these recommendations of like, for this one, if they don't have video, like maybe this is one that you pause on the paid side, let organic on. And then especially with things like branded and non-branded, kind of similar story where, if organic ranks in position 1, they haven't lost any search impression share. So there's no competition really. Like let's let organic own this one so that these other ones that don't have enough data because the budget is spent before it's even able to get to those keywords, like this will give them an ability to actually see how they perform.
Yeah, that's really smart. It might be a good segue into the piece that you authored around sort of this new era of AI search and sort of all the things that go into that ecosystem on a search results page. When you were putting that piece together, what did you think was maybe most misunderstood about what this new ecosystem is? Was there like a key finding, out of that piece that you put together?
Yeah, a lot of the agencies that I worked at from pretty much like 2015 to 2025, they would put a lot of packages together based off of technical and on-site SEO. And I get it. Like these are things that are within our control and we can more readily promise and deliver. Whereas, like off page, you either have like a dedicated agency that's literally out there trying to fetch backlinks, or, you have to be very upfront about the fact that we are at the mercy of so many third parties to try and make this happen that it's not a guarantee. And so, obviously people are like, well, how many spending money? Like, I don't want a wish. I want a promise. And I think that's been the thing that with AI that like is such a game changer, because you can't have off-page SEO as this optional package. Like you have to be there because like they're all scraping, aggregating, synthesizing it, especially at this point too, since we know that certain things like a polished video that maybe you had a huge production team it's not going to perform well on TikTok. They prefer something that's more authentic and, for lack of a better word, rugged. And it's like, and so there's no excuse not to do something. So if you sell laundry detergent, get someone who works there to like take a video of like, here's how it works. Here's how you would apply it to a stain. And I personally really like that because I feel like so much of AI is it's pushing for that authenticity. Like if I want to know about a product, I don't go to the website because I know I'm going to get a bunch of marketing copy that says we do all the things, and I'm like, but does it do this one very specific thing that I'm looking for? And yeah, usually I'm going to find that on Reddit, or it could be even in a Google Business Review.
I think one of the most interesting things about that is that this space is moving so fast, and the traditional approach of a super expensive, highly polished, advertorial or something like that, right, would take weeks or months to actually get filmed, cut, published. And now, you can publish a million things in that same time period just with a down and dirty, iPhone or something like that. So I think the challenges of actually getting some of that content created and published, the bar to doing that is much lower now, which is good because the space is moving so fast. You almost need that speed to be able to compete.
If I could, I want to try and bring us back to the conversation we were having just before this question about like that intersection of the two channels, paid and organic, because it has to change a little bit now, right? With organic search traffic starting to, it's shrinking for everyone. 0-click search is like the reality we live in. And now we have this opportunity to optimize for LLMs, but like finding that balance of how much do I invest in paid media and how does that inform my answer engine optimization program? It's really hard. And there was a word that you said, conversion. Like when you would put these analyses together for your clients, you would always show them like the differences in conversions from the different channels. It's much harder to do now. And I wonder, is there a proxy for conversion you can do with an analysis now? Is it like an increase in direct traffic, or do you need referral traffic? Is there another way you can piece together this analysis to show how the two channels can work together to try to guide someone on like investment strategy?
Yeah, this is a great question. In terms of, is there something else that we track? I know certainly direct is one that for a couple of clients I've just outright owned on the organic side. And I always clear this up with them in advance as I maybe a parent, very, very transparent with people, but I'm like, I can't prove it, but I'm like, directionally, I think it's worth looking at. And I do think that for a number of sites that I've worked on, direct and organic have had a ongoing, very clearly correlated relationship, especially since that the great separation, I don't want to call it the purple crocodile, but when everyone saw like clicks decreasing, impressions increasing, I had a number of accounts where direct and organic previously were basically following parallel paths, and right around the same time, direct started to see this uptick. And in my opinion, I think that that's directly related to like how people are using AI, where because you can ask all of these detailed questions and specifics and follow-ups, you can get to know a brand because it's out there scouring the web, it's pulling all of these information sources in. And then once you finally understand and know the brand, you're like, okay, then I'll just go to the website directly. And this is something that I'm desperate to get log files to any of my clients to be able to kind of like show if we've seen, hey, there was a significant bump from bots crawling these pages, and then shortly thereafter, we saw direct traffic increase on the user side. I would love if I could show that. I can't, just because I'm sure as everyone knows, getting access to log files is just
we're dealing with that right now. Yeah,
but yeah, on the direct traffic side of things, like I think that brand is now more of the equation than previous, and so to bring it all the way back to the original point of where can paid and organic kind of work together, I do think branded traffic is kind of something that, again, speaking from recent experience, most of the agencies I worked at, there was a huge focus on non-brand just because it's like, well, you're going to rank for your brand name. It's not going to matter. And this to me is where like strategically AI has shifted a lot of stuff, is that I think treating brand as like it's now fair game. I will say this has been fixed, but there was a time where if I did a site search operator in Google for a website, the AI overview would pull other websites. And I was like,
oh, wow.
Yeah. It's like, if you don't own your own site search operator, if this can populate an AI overview, then it's like, yeah, then everything's fair game. And so that's an area where I think looking at branded traffic as it relates and looking at direct sessions and trying to find a strategy with paid and organic, I think is kind of a new frontier.
That is exactly the kind of thing we're tracking with clients constantly right now. Honestly, this is exactly the kind of thing we spend our days on in Moving Traffic Media. So let me take 30 seconds on that. Quick word about the team behind this show. The Page 2 podcast is produced by Moving Traffic Media. That's our agency. Moving Traffic Media is a digital marketing agency that specializes in SEO, answer engine optimization, and performance media. In plain English, we help brands show up in traditional search and in AI answers when people ask ChatGPT, Claude, Perplexity, or Google about them. And we back that up with everything around it, from paid media and social to web development built for how AI agents actually browse. Joe DeVita and I founded Moving Traffic Media, and we're headquartered in New York with a second office in Miami. So if your brand isn't showing up in AI answers the way it should, that's what we do every day. You can find us at movingtrafficmedia.com. Okay, back to the show. Derek, before the break, you were making the case that branded and direct traffic are becoming a much bigger part of the sort of AI search picture than they used to be. Can you talk a little bit more about actually owning that direct channel? So when you would report that data, were you merging those data points together and you would just say, this is traffic we're responsible for as a general statement? Or would you position them as still two distinct buckets, but we want to take some incremental credit for growth in the direct channel, and then we have organic over here? Does that make sense? Like, are you thinking about them as one holistic number, I guess?
No. So I keep them separate, but I talk to them very upfront about, I think this one is something we can take ownership of. And I always find out who's owning direct, because I know when I'd worked in-house, usually it was like the email marketing team, but and maybe you guys have noticed this as well. I'm finding more and more, no one owns direct as a channel, which
you're right. It's just sort of assumed as like, we're going to get this traffic, and everything else that we're doing outside of, just general activities is going to be, what we report on. Yeah. It's interesting.
Yeah. I usually, because this is the other thing too, with working with paid and organic a lot, I would always pull like all the channel traffic data. So I'd pull referral, I'd pull affiliate, I'd pull social. And I would do that because a lot of times people would, they'd have suspicions that paid is cannibalizing. And sometimes it was, but sometimes it's like, actually a very specific one I can think of is there was a company that they were convinced that due to paid cannibalization, they had lost a bunch of conversions. And when looking at their data, if you looked at just paid and organic, it sure looked that was the case. But when pulling in their other channel data, there was a very huge spike in affiliate referral that then had a huge drop off. And when we dug into this, it was clear that they had acquired a smaller competitor and they had done all the redirects and all that jazz, but they did not get access to the SSL certificate. And because of that, when it came time for that domain to renew, it was like relatively within a short window of like 2 months. No one owned it. And so all of these backlinks that were going to the secure version of this website they acquired broke. And yeah, and it created a huge domino effect across their entire landscape, where they pointed at paid and organic, like, oh, we're cannibalizing. We used to get all these. And it's like, no, like, you guys have just lost like a ton of authority, and there was no way to get it back, which was the other huge bonus. But yeah.
So some opportunistic affiliate bought the SSL, or how did they lose it?
Yeah. So the competitor site that they bought was big in affiliate and referral. And so they had all of these existing links that had just been around for years, and they all just broke. So instead of now redirecting to their website and passing along everything, all of these would 404, and there was no way to get them back outside of manually doing some outreach.
Well, we talked a little bit about direct. How do you think about incorporating LLM referral traffic? Are you keeping those two separate? Are you counting them as part of the SEO bucket? How are you thinking about LLM referrals as it relates to reporting?
Yeah, I do. So I do try and include it. Like I always do like in analytics, the source medium, so that like I can broadly like roll this up and be like, here's the referral, here's where we can see, then this came from ChatGPT or whatever. But oh boy, I wish I could give them the credit they deserve. I know there was someone out there in the ether who discovered that a lot of times LLMs don't even trigger analytics because, and this is where I started getting into the log files. because they were expecting the user agent to come up as ChatGPT, but typically when they would ping their own site, the user agent would come up as whatever the browser was. And it was the signature agent in the log files that would say like, oh, this is actually coming from ChatGPT. And so between that, as well as like when I do like go through Google Analytics, you'll see Claude, you'll see like a legacy Bard LLM, and sometimes it's like, this is referral, or we're going to count this one as a paid one. And it's like, wait, what? Like, I try and track all of them, but I haven't necessarily seen anything from the standardized LLM traffic that I can then, because it all looks so small. Like there could be a site that's getting tens of thousands of visits, and then the LLM traffic is like 300. And I'm just like, I don't think that's right. I mean, I get that like they can scrape and everything, so maybe they don't have to hit the site. But I'm just, it's again, it's kind of one of the reasons why I go toward direct. So I'm like, this, to me, this feels more directionally relevant than like trying to capture the like LLM referrals in analytics.
We all understand if you want to optimize for answer engines, you need a strong foundation, technically your website, right? You still need SEO is still important because being ranked high organically is a signal that LLMs are using to retrieve answers for people. But you didn't get to see what keywords were being searched by an LLM, right? That query fan out that the LLM was using, where in the past you had your own reporting to say, all right, these are the keywords that are important to me. They're ranking. Here's the traffic. Now that traffic is coming from an LLM bot, right? And we're starting to get that information. It feels like it's just this week. I don't know if I read it. It was Microsoft Clarity or there's some new tool.
Oh, right.
Did that just happen this week? Like we can now see the fan out and like what are the keywords the LLM is then searching. Like this feels like a new piece of information for us.
Yeah, so Microsoft Clarity is going to start including fan out queries and grounding queries, which we can sort of get from Bing Search Console, but not in like an analytics dashboard. So Clarity, I don't know what the market share is. I assume very low compared to Google Analytics, but I would say, Microsoft definitely leading the way, at least on sharing that sort of data. But yeah, I think that makes all of this a lot more interesting, especially to your point, Derek, around like using log files. Like now, maybe you can start to connect some relationship with what the query or the prompt is to, what's actually happening on the website. If you can connect those two in some way, I mean, that could be really interesting.
It justifies that point that we keep making that like the strong SEO foundation is still important. Like people are ready to like just kind of give up a little bit on SEO, but it's still a huge factor in your success with AEO. I think this is just another tool we have to start using to say, no, you know what? You still need to invest there. In addition to this content ecosystem of third-party websites, which you can no longer ignore when you're optimizing for organic traffic. This is the point Derek made really well in a lot of the writing that you've done.
Well, thank you. Yeah. And I do find it really interesting with the fan out because it's only been recently that, because I have a script I use the Gemini API to get the grounding fan out queries. And I'm torn on this because I am seeing it diverge a bit. But I used to think like, oh, this is effectively just people also ask, but it's not verbatim, but it's effectively like, oh, these are the subsequent. But I have started to see a lot of that change where now it's like, it wants to drill. Honestly, a lot of the fan outs that I'm getting, especially around branded, keep going after like what authority that someone has. Like, would you like to see, like, the fan out would be like, does this company have a BBB listing and stuff like that, where I'm like, this is kind of fascinating that it's doing its due diligence on, even though I didn't mention it.
Well, I think Profound put out some information that was super interesting around, I think it was more Claude specific, but things that they would append to their fan outs. So for example, they would append the current year, so 2026. So, clearly looking for more fresh information. There are a couple other things that escape me at the moment, but it was interesting to sort of see how they might be modifying the fan outs based on, what the prompt actually was. Were you seeing any of those sorts of things in the Gemini data that you were analyzing?
No, But mine was more specific around cruise ships, and then when I was playing with it, I was checking around turns around like SEO is dead, just seeing what they're searching. But that it doesn't surprise me that there would be appending years to these things, because I know from a while back I worked with a sports betting client, and I always felt that was always a fascinating thing on the SEO side, where if you even just type in something like, oh no, I'm going to get this so wrong because I am not a sports guy. If you did Lakers versus Jazz, that would have typically less search volume than if you did Lakers versus Jazz 2026 or something, like, which I always found fascinating, even though it makes sense, especially if you're betting. But yeah, anyway, just an anecdote.
I'm fascinated by how folks are figuring out ways to use AI. You created a content gap script, which I thought was fascinating. Have you iterated on that since then? I think that was a few months ago, maybe even longer. And in addition to the query fan out, how else are you thinking about using AI to, I don't know, either make your work more efficient or find new data? I'm always fascinated to hear how folks are leveraging these tools as it relates to SEO.
Yeah. I've been making more and more scripts, especially as it relates to G Sheets, because I really like having the data in G Sheets. And I'm not violating any, I'm not holding on to someone's data in case this comes up in a lawsuit, and I digress. I like having all the data inside a G Sheet because I like being able to, like, in a perfect world, I would always have at least 25 months of data to work from. I like being able to show directionally how things are going. And it's something that I'm once finding out that, like, both Gemini and Claude are real good at just making an app script for G Sheets, where I was like, can I just start automating, like, the data pull that I do every month to just happen on the second of each month? And yeah, there's a client, for instance, where I run their paid organic and their social, and I had it connect all of my APIs. And so my G Sheet now auto populates in the fields that I want. And that's been tremendous. And so that's really automating the simple stuff, or the easy stuff, has been incredible, where I feel like it just frees up so much of my time. The other thing that I use it a lot for is the pattern recognition, because I don't know how many hours of my life I've lost categorizing keywords. Because even like with a basic regex, there would always be one where it's like, that would fit into both. And that's what I really love with, like, vector embeddings, when it's like,
Yes.
wait. You, in an AI world, you could find a pattern, and that's something I full faith in AI doing correctly. One of the biggest pet peeves I have with reporting is when people will have, like, an executive summary that will be like, here's traffic, here's sessions, here's engagement rate. And then the next slide is, here's some individual keywords or pages that go up or down. I always am like, there's a middle piece that's missing, where it's like, give me the category, give me the types of pages or the categories of keywords that are, like, moving, and then drill down into, like, individual keywords. And that's been something that with AI, it's so much easier. And so those are the ways, at least at the moment, that I've been using it. I know that there's things that I should be doing, but because I know, like, I've seen people who literally rebuilt, like, interfaces like on Scrunch basically, and I'm extremely impressed, but I'm not there yet.
Yeah, a little bit more dedication to the, I don't know, Codex or Claude Code for that, right? I wanted to talk a little bit about reporting. And I think one of the things that I read in my research was around how you encourage people to research positive results the same way that they might investigate a negative result. Like, how did that concept come to you? Because I feel like for most people, they latch on to that positive result as, like, this is it just is. Maybe we did something that influenced it, but you sort of accept it at face value and you sort of move on to the next, hopefully positive metric, right? Like, what made you start to think about and sort of reverse that, I don't know, maybe approach?
Yeah, I think it's only something that I started thinking about more as I slowly am realizing I'm old. Because, it's one of those things where, like, I remember at Brainlabs, I made a comment about Office Space, and people are just like, what the hell are you? What is that? And it's like, oh, we're not part of the same age bracket, and that's fine. But it's making any sort of reference, and now realizing, like, this is what it feels like. So around the same time of that existential crisis came the thing of reporting versus impact tracking. And I think a big part of it is, and maybe this is true, I would actually love to know if this is true of you guys too, but, like, I feel like a lot of people I know got into SEO because they kind of stumble into it. Like even if they got a job with like paid or affiliate or, like completely unrelated field, it's almost like a natural consequence in like, I say early internet, but not early internet, but like you try and figure out like, is there a way that I can appear more often or frequently? So actually I'll pause there for a second. What are you both in the same camp, or did you went into SEO?
We hear it all the time with guests on this podcast, like backgrounds in development, backgrounds in writing, backgrounds in media. It's like everyone's got a slightly different story, but nobody graduates from college to become a search engine optimization professional, it seems.
I actually did graduate with a marketing degree, but had no concept of what SEO was. I sort of, fell into it by accident. It was something that the company I needed when I was working there, and I think I was an intern at the time, and they were like, "Hey, look into this," and totally by accident.
Fascinating. See, this is I find this fascinating. But like, and to that end, there are people who I worked with who in their college they've now taken like an SEO course, like, and on the surface, I was like, that's awesome. I wish I could have taken one. But in hindsight, I do think that's something that is kind of setting apart SEOs, which is, not to make it an ageist thing. I just mean like I think that there's, because I think most SEOs are inherently curious, but I have met a lot of people who do SEO and they treat it as like boxes to check with like character counts and you do keyword research, you make this article, rather than like, they haven't built their own website or even like, a Wix or a Squarespace website. And
they don't know what Dreamweaver is.
Yes. And I think that that's something that like, cause I know when I was making a website, I'm like, I want to replicate success because I want a passive income. I would try for a while to like be like, this worked. Is it because I mentioned this thing? This didn't work. Is it because this is oversaturated? And like looking around for ins and outs and angles. This is why too, like even things like Eat. It's like effectively like have an opinion or have an experience and then write about it. And I think that's where the wanting to investigate positive results, like negative results, comes from, because I think everyone who works in an agency, regardless of their history, has had that moment where a client is upset and they're like, I need to find out what's wrong. But I do think that I certainly know from working at a lot of agencies that there's times where something goes right, and rather than dig into it, they're like, job's done. I can get this project over and move on to my next thing. When like, and I think that that's like it's setting oneself up for failure, because then if you need to replicate it, if they're like, let's not take credit for something that we can't replicate or that, is a flash in the pan. There's so much in the way of like, for that very thing, like there will be something that can be like a flash in the pan and someone skyrockets, and it's a rude awakening when the client wants you to do it again.
Well, I guess maybe in that vein of that personal experience is so unique for people who have been in the industry for so long. And we now have AI that, you could arguably like learn from or get an opinion from if you really had to, as like maybe a newer person in the industry. You've certainly had experience at Brainlabs and elsewhere where managing a team, hiring, bringing on juniors. Without that history, like how do you think about developing like those junior people into execution thinkers where, I don't know, maybe a lot of times they're just getting information directly from an LLM, assuming it's fact, checking the boxes, as you say, and sort of moving on. Like, have you thought about that at all?
Yeah, it actually really bums me out, because this is something that, and I get why, don't get me wrong. There was no way we could do this at Brainlabs, but I tried to build like an extracurricular activity where I wanted to take people back to early SEO, where, people would just be like, I'm going to rank this gibberish word on 2 separate websites. For this one, I'm just going to update the metadata and the heading tag. And for this one, I'm going to leave those blank, but I'm going to put in the schema the gibberish word. Let's see which one ranks for this completely made up word. And I wish that there was a way to do that at scale, to like get people to like take their curiosity and just experiment more. I do think, to that end, I think that there are, and this is why too, like I really am noticing this more this year, much more so than last year. It's certainly true on client side, that whereas clients would have been more like conservative with their funds, and then are more like, hey, I'm open to trying something. I think that there's a world where, you know what? I'm going to rephrase this. Something that I taught the people at Brainlabs that I always wanted to make sure happened first is I'm like, treat yourself as a marketer first and an SEO second. And my example of this is like, if you took all of Mazda's, color palettes and publicity briefs and whatnot, you gave AI all of this way back pre-2000. It had all of this information. I don't think AI is going to create the Zoom Zoom campaign. That comes from creative. And I think that that's something that there have been times where when I'm strictly wearing an SEO hat, I have purposely not done something because I'm like, well, that falls into more just marketing broadly. Actually, I think I can give this example because this has been on my favorite example of this is Pookie, which is a lighting lamps company that was in the UK, and I helped them come over to the US, and they're great. They're exceptional, and I love them, even though I don't work with them anymore. But they had a lamp that was featured in the Barbie movie, and I told them for April Fools, we should be like, hey, we're going to sell this Pookie. In the Barbie movie, there's a very tacky horse lampshade, and I had told them like we should say that you're selling that on April Fools as part of like the April Fools isn't really something in the UK, and so I was like, for the US, we should have a blog content around this. It'll get people to the site. It's a good, I was like, I can see almost no area where someone is going to take offense to this. Like, this would just be good publicity. And they were like, well, what's the SEO benefit? And I was like, well, we could get some backlinks maybe. And they're like, can you commit to a number on that? And I was like, no, just, and they're like, is anyone going to buy this fake lampshade? And won't they get upset? And I'm like, you know what, forget it. Let's walk away. And to this day, I'm still kicking myself that I didn't push that further. And I think especially with AI now, I would have been like, absolutely, like people are going to be talking about this. And the Barbie movie had its moment with where it was like that unforeseen hit. And yeah, I think that sort of that creative piece, which again, I even think that sense of humor is like, that's part of the human element that makes SEOs good is like they're marketers. Like, so find the avenues to be a marketer.
Derek, I know this is the first time we've met, but I've studied a lot about you in preparing for this interview. You have a natural inclination to collaborate. I could see it in things that you've written about, and I can sense it in this interview now. You spent a lot of time professionally with Brainlabs trying to get paid media and SEO teams to collaborate. This example you've given of getting like an SEO and a PR team to collaborate is another really good example. But we're in this reality right now where that collaborate. If you don't collaborate across these channels, you fail with AEO. I don't know that the business community, marketing leadership globally has figured this out yet, but every company needs some kind of master collaborator to make sure all these channels are marching toward the same strategy. And we keep talking about this content ecosystem that you have to optimize for. And like, PR is such a big piece of it. Like you need that reinforcement from these third party publishers that people trust. Like for someone to poo-poo that idea about a great PR campaign is just like I'm like, it's upsetting me. I'm sorry. You had to bring that story up. Now you got me upset on my own podcast.
Well, I mean, maybe it's a good question. Like how, like if you had to do it over, like how would you collaborate with PR to, I don't know, try to sell that through better? Like, would you take the approach of this will influence, or this is likely to influence, how you're perceived or how you show up in LLMs? Like, would that be a carrot you would sort of dangle in front of them if you could do it over today?
Yeah. I think that would be the best way to go about it. Cause like, I see this now a lot with LLMs too, where like there was a pest company that like they were mostly based out of the East Coast, but they had a couple spots on the West Coast. And no matter where you searched on the East Coast, a Reddit thread in Eugene, Oregon, what that was negatively talking about was like the first thing that pops up. And like, I think stuff like that, even though it's a very niche example, like, yeah, I think, being able to be like, this is the thing that like, it's topical, it's relevant. We know from like the Claude developer notes that like, if something is new or it doesn't have it in its data already, it's going to go out and fetch, increase the likelihood of a web link. I think that would be the carrot that I would dangle.
Very nice. Let's jump to a couple of quick rapid fires to close things up. What's the first thing that you look for when you start auditing a site maybe you've never worked on?
I visit the site. It's so I realize it sounds so obvious, but I kid you not, as I'm sure maybe you guys have seen as well. This has happened at least 10 times, even just in the last 3 years, where I will ask someone to do a tech audit or something, and they'll use Screaming Frog to crawl it. They'll check out analytics. They'll check out Search Console. They'll look at Ahrefs or SEMrush, and they'll look at the keyword rankings. They'll come back and they'll give me this nice report. And then it's like, did you go to the website? And they're like, oh, no. And so, first thing is definitely going to the website.
So true.
Acronym question. I think I know the answer for this one, but John and I position our service as AEO. We hear GEO a lot. I've heard LLMO. Of course, there's traditional SEO, and then you've got Rand Fishkin's definition, search everywhere optimization. Which camp do you fall into with acronyms?
I will call it whatever a client wants to call it. If they tell me that the powers that be are like, we need a geo strategy, I'm like, done. We'll make it a geo strategy.
Okay.
I would do the same for AEO. I do acknowledge that there are things, like, again, even just with like the meta description and now again, open graph descriptions, which I previously hadn't touched for years, but I see that gets great. I do think that there are things that fall into AI that are outside of the realm of SEO. And so I do think it's fair to like talk about those things. And I know it was so funny seeing Dan Petrovic just recently did, the thing that basically resulted in the invention of SEO, where he just did white text on a white background to prompt AI once you reach the page. And it worked because the LLM was like, yeah, I'll read this and process it. And it's, so it's stuff like that where I'm like, if that's something that's happening now, like, then it's very clearly, it's in its infancy and it's going to keep evolving. So I fully understand when people are saying that there is a difference, but I think it's still early.
We talked a little bit about reporting. If you had to report negative, or I don't know, what you might call bad results, what's the best medium, or I guess maybe forum to do that? Is it a live conversation? Is it a single slide that sort of frames the why and the what? Is it a memo? Is it a dashboard?
Yeah, I think it depends on what is bad. I think if it's something like there was an algorithm change and like one-to-one, you can clearly see that they dropped. I think that that's something that's worth like pinging an email to say like, hey, we're noticing that since this update went live or finished rolling out, things have gone sour and we're going to investigate it more, but we can jump on a phone call if needed, just because I think it's more immediate, and that way it's not like you're hiding anything. I think if it's something like the performance since going live with a bunch of changes that the SEO team did are bad, I would say that for a deck where basically I'm like, okay, performance is bad, but we took some time internally and we're going to pivot the strategy to do this, this, and this. So that, again, not hiding the bad stuff necessarily, but like, instead of being like, yeah, we know it's bad and it's our fault, it's like, it's bad. Here's what we're going to do about it.
Have you heard that accurate, or the approach where it's like good thing, bad thing, good thing? So you like sort of smash it in between, like the hamburger approach?
Yeah.
Derek, what is one important maritime battle that you think you want your daughter to be able to explain to her friends?
Oh my God. The War of 1812. This is something that I think is so, and it's actually, oh my God, this is so relevant given the conversation. So my favorite thing about the War of 1812 is that it's effectively what made people be like, Andrew Jackson is a hero and he's the greatest, military officer that we could possibly have imagined. And it's because he won the decisive battle of New Orleans, I believe it was. But the thing is, the war had actually ended 6 months earlier. But it's just communication, obviously, back in the day was very slow. And so these guys were still fighting a war that had ended. But I think about that a lot with like, even just how you were talking about, Joe, about like teams that work in a silo and don't communicate, when it's like, that's how you fail. Like the lack of communication between different departments. Now, I guess, to be fair, Andrew Jackson did, like, again, people were like, he's a hero, and wound up becoming president. But, I just mean like, the war ended. So it should never have happened to begin with.
He won something that didn't necessarily need to be won.
Yeah.
Well, Derek, this has been great. It's been a pleasure meeting you, and thanks for coming on the show and digging into the weeds with us. Let our listeners know where they can find you online, and are you going to be speaking at any conferences coming up?
No, I'm not going to be speaking at any conferences, but hoping to be an audience member. And you can find me at SEOhumorist.com or on LinkedIn, where I'm very active and happy to chat about anything.
Very good. Well, thanks again for joining us on the Page 2 podcast. And for those listening, if you enjoyed the show, please remember to subscribe, rate, and review. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.